Commas are weird creatures. For many people, using commas is like throwing Jello at the wall, hoping that something will stick. Often, commas are written down here, there, and everywhere in people's writing. They are thrown around haphazardly like a beach ball at a sports event, or worse, they're not used at all. No matter how many times they've been told that commas indicate a brief pause, people still struggle to implement one of the world's most confusing forms of punctuation. The reality is that commas cannot be avoided. They are integral writing elements that help to give writing tone and a structure that reflects our spoken word. Having too many commas in a sentence renders the writing choppy, like you cannot express a coherent thought, and you don't know how to fix the problem, despite your best intentions. The other extreme is that people never use commas, although they intend to, and their readers end up rushing to the end of their sentence without ever stopping to take a break or to take time to process what is being said. Today, I'm going to show you 4 primary comma rules that will help you with your writing. The list rule, the independent clause rule, the dependent clause rule, and the parenthetical rule. So let's start with the easy one, the list rule. Everybody knows that commas divide individual items in a list. If I say that I picked up milk, eggs, flour, and bread at the grocery store, I can use the commas to separate each item in the list. Some of you may have even been told that the comma before the final item in the list is optional. This rule is incorrect, and it gets perpetuated by teachers who do not have a grasp on grammatical principles. This final comma, which is often referred to as the Oxford comma, is essential. Adding the final comma ensures that each item in the list is distinguished from the rest. Perhaps the Oxford comma does not matter as much in a sentence such as I picked up milk, eggs, flour, and bread at the grocery store, because each item in that list is understood as distinct. I can remove that final comma and still understand that flour and bread are distinct elements. However, most of the writing that you will do will be more complex than a grocery list, which is why the Oxford comma is so important. This meme helps to explain things. If I say I had eggs, orange juice, and toast, it is understood that I had each item individually. The comma separates them so that they are easy for us to manage. If I remove the final comma, however, the sentence reads differently. Instead of having I had eggs, orange juice, and toast, the sentence now reads I had eggs, orange juice, and toast. The change is subtle, but it's profound. Now, the speaker is talking to the orange juice and the toast, which are not an entity in themselves. First off, orange juice and toast are inanimate objects, so speaking to them is likely not what the writer intended. Moreover, combining orange juice and toast, well, that's just strange. If that's your thing, fine, but it's not the norm. Basically, the sentence has shifted unintentionally by omitting the comma. The easiest way to ensure that you are always correct is to always add that final comma. The second rule is what I call the independent clause rule. This occurs when 2 independent clauses are joined by a conjunction. But first, what is an independent clause? An independent clause contains a subject and a verb, and it can stand as its own sentence. Here are 2 examples of independent clauses. Number 1, the squirrel gathered food for the winter, and number 2, this food would hopefully last until spring. Each of these are independent clauses because they have a subject and a verb, and each clause can stand alone. When we're writing, however, having too many independent thoughts or in short sentences can make writing choppy, so we often combine these sentences. If I want to combine these sentences or clauses, I can use coordinating conjunctions such as and, but, for, nor, so, or yet, to fuse them. The result is that I would get a sentence like this. The squirrel gathered food for the winter, and this food would hopefully last until spring. The clauses have not changed, but I have added a comma and a conjunction combination to clarify them. The third rule is what I call the dependent clause rule. What is a dependent clause? Well, if an independent clause can stand on its own, a dependent clause cannot. It still has a subject and a verb, but it depends on the independent clause to complete the sentence. The dependent clause is often referred to as a subordinate clause, but this is just a fancier way of saying the same thing. For example, I cannot say, although the price of gas has increased steadily, and have it stand alone as a sentence. It is a clause containing a subject, price, and a verb, increased, but it cannot stand alone. I need an independent clause to complete it. Although the price of gas has increased steadily, I continue to drive. When combined with the independent clause, I continue to drive, the sentence is now complete. This rule can also be modified to include phrases, which are like dependent clauses, but they lack either a subject or a verb. Here's another example, this time using a phrase and an independent clause. Despite many difficulties, the team was able to defeat all of its opponents. The phrase, despite many difficulties, combines with the independent clause. The team was able to defeat all of its opponents to create a coherent sentence. The rule is complicated to understand, but it's not impossible to grasp if you really put your mind to it. The final rule, the parenthetical rule, is easier. The parenthetical rule sets off information that adds context to the sentence, but which does not belong in the core sentence structure. You can offset this information using commas, similar to how you would use parentheses in a sentence. Take, for example, the following sentence. The trail through the mountain was dangerous because it did not have any railings. Now this can stand alone as its own sentence. If I want to clarify information about the trail itself, such as adding, which was terrifying beyond belief, I could use commas as parentheticals. Here's how the final product would look. The trail through the mountain, which was terrifying beyond belief, was dangerous because it did not have any railings. This is pretty easy to do. All I've done is add 2 commas, and I've added that information that I wanted to add to clarify the context in between those commas to complete the sentence and really enhance the way that it's being received. The one problem with these rules is that knowing them does not necessarily mean that a person can apply them to the writing. Here are some other tips for improving your comma usage. For starters, read your paper aloud as it is supposed to be read. You don't need to deliver a speech to your family, but reading aloud and adhering to your punctuation can help you catch where you need to pause and where you do not. You can improve your comma usage tremendously just by doing this task. Another thing that you can do is go through your paper and identify your independent clauses. You can then determine whether they would best be combined through a comma-conjunction combination or whether they're best left alone. That's up to you. The third tip that I have is that you should look for certain words that begin your sentences. If you find transition word phrases, such as however, furthermore, otherwise, on one hand, or moreover, for example, you can add commas after these words to begin your sentence. The final tip that I have is that words like although, even though, despite, regardless, and things like that often begin a dependent clause. Find where that clause meets an independent clause and add your comma there. There are other ways to implement commas I know, such as signatures, greetings, or after introductory transition words, which I've touched on briefly. But these 4 rules that I've covered in the video can get you through most of your comma conundrums. Commas are not an easy thing to master, but with time and concentration, they're not so daunting.